Om Vasudevasutang Devam Kausachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishno Vande Jagadgurum Shri Krishno Vande Jagadgurum. Pranams from Dr. R.J. Kalpana. Welcome to the study of the Bhagavad Gita. In this session, we will focus our attention on chapter 4, JnanaKarmaSamnyasaYoga, from Shloka 21 onwards. In Shloka 21, Krishna says, having subdued his mind and body and given up all objects of enjoyment and free from craving, he who performs sheer bodily actions does not incur sin. So here Krishna gives us the means by which we do not create more samskaras, which results in more bondage for us, keeping us tied to this physical dimension. So what does he say? 1. Subdue the mind and the body. Exercise an immense degree of self-discipline and self-control. Self-discipline over the mind, meaning have control over your thoughts. We choose to think. The choice of thoughts are under our control. Often during meditation, practitioners complain that they are inundated by thoughts and they are unable to free themselves from these thoughts. This is like saying, I go hug a tree and say the tree is not letting me go. So we hold on to our thoughts, but we think that the thoughts are holding on to us. On the contrary, the tree is not holding on to us. We are holding on to that tree. Let go of your thoughts. Treat them as uninvited guests. So subdue your mind. Subdue the thoughts that arise in your mind. Have only one thought, single-minded purpose. The goal, that's the only thought that has to remain in our mind. Subdue the body. How? By giving up objects of enjoyment. By freeing ourselves from the pleasures of the senses. By freeing ourselves from all temptations and cravings of desires that we might have. And therefore, if and when we still perform bodily actions, we still use our body, we still use our senses, having still a physical form, we are subject to using that physical form to function in society, to function in this dimension. And thereby, even while we use the physical form and perform bodily actions, we will not generate further samskaras. Why? Because our actions thus are dedicated to that one goal, that one divine principle that resonates within all of us. Shloka 22, Krishna says, "The karma yogi who is contented with whatever is got unsought is free from jealousy and has transcended all pairs of opposites like joy and grief, and is balanced in success and failure, is not bound by his action." And so he goes on to explain Shloka 21, which we just saw, in further detail by stating that that yogi is called a karma yogi who is content with whatever he receives, is free from jealousy, is not envious that others have what he doesn't have, is content with whatever he has, and who has transcended, who has gone beyond the pairs of opposites like joy and grief, pain and pleasure. And has a balanced equanimity with both, treating both success and failure with equipoise. That karma yogi is not bound by his actions. So that karma yogi does not generate any further samskaras, and thereby anything favorable obtained under the force of prarabdha karma, or anything unfavorable under the guise of prarabdha karma that a person has to undergo or the person has to experience, having come face to face with it, is neither attracted by it nor is repulsed by it. It just accepts it as it is, and thereby is on the path towards liberation. Why? Because he is not anymore prey to the binding effects of his actions. In Shloka 23, Krishna says, "All his actions melt away who is free from attachment, who has no identification with the body and does not claim it as his own, whose mind is established in the knowledge of self, and who works merely for the sake of sacrifice." So here Krishna is once again reiterating the same point, but approaching it in a different manner, but explaining that the bondage that actions generate, the samskaras that our actions generate, will melt away if we are free from attachment, if we do not unnecessarily have any attachment to those actions, nor do we have attachment to the results of those actions. No identification with the body. Why? Because the yogi is firmly established in the causal body, in the self with a capital S. Whose mind is established in the knowledge of self, and who works merely for the sake of sacrifice. So here the last phrase, "for the sake of sacrifice," meaning the Vedic rituals that have been ordained by him through the various stages of his life. So whatever his duties are that he needs to perform, which is written and sanctified by the Vedas, if he performs them, and he performs them because he has to perform them, it is his duty to perform them, be it shraddha, tarpana for his ancestors, be it marriage rituals, be it rituals of Griha Pravesh or housewarming, whatever the rituals that are ordained for a for him in whichever stage of life. It could be even a brahmacharya, and for a brahmacharya, Upanayanam, the sacred thread ceremony that takes place. So here in particular, the sake of sacrifice is referencing to the duties and responsibilities that we need to discharge in the course of our life. So, Shloka 24. In the practice of seeing Brahma everywhere as a form of sacrifice, Brahma is the ladle with which the oblation is poured into the fire. Brahma again is the oblation. Brahma is the fire, Brahma itself the sacrificer, and so Brahma itself constitutes the act of pouring the oblation into the fire. And finally, Brahma is the goal to be reached by him who is absorbed in Brahma as the act of such a sacrifice. So here, Krishna, in the form of practices undertaken by men with the object of God realization, describes the sacrifice of seeing everything as Brahma. Right? Brahma is the sacrifice, Brahma is the ladle, is the oblation, the fire, the sacrificer, the act of pouring the oblation into the fire, the goal. Everything becomes Brahma. So basically, the principle is that to see the divine everywhere and everything, to invest every act with a divine thought. Shloka 25. Other yogis duly offer sacrifice only in the shape of worship to gods. Others pour into the fire of Brahma the very sacrifice in the shape of the self through the sacrifice known as the perception of identity. So here, Krishna is referring to the various other forms of sacrifice. So, the practice of japa, the practice of charity, and offering such worship to different celestial entities. Whereas there are some who offer into the fire of Brahma the sacrifice of their very own self, their identity, meaning their ego. So here there is a difference between two types of sacrifice. One is those that is offering to the celestial entities with a desired motive. The other is to offer oneself up, to offer our identity, our ego, our very self into the very fires of sacrifice with the sole object of God realization. Shloka 26. Others offer as sacrifice their senses of hearing into the fires of self-discipline. Other yogis again offer sound and other objects of perception into the fires of the senses. So here, this is a very interesting, but also it's a very ancient practice. And if we travel to the Himalayas, it's possible that such practices are still prevalent. over there. What Krishna is saying here is that because our senses are so turbulent, tempestuous, and it's extremely difficult to control them, thereby some offer their senses up into the fires of self-discipline, meaning you often find people, sadhus, not speaking. They have a maun breath. They take a vow of silence. You have others who will not eat. They are in perpetual fasting. So they are offering up their senses. They are offering up one particular sense in order to discipline the other senses. They're making the sacrifice of one particular sense to discipline the other senses. And again, there are other yogis who offer sound and other objects of perception into the fires of senses. So again, here too, they offer sound. Meaning that whether they hear praise or criticism, whether it is agreeable or disagreeable, they keep their mind balanced and do not allow themselves to be swayed. Shloka 27. Others sacrifice all the functions of their senses and the functions of the vital airs into the fire of yoga in the shape of self-control kindled by wisdom. Now this process that is described in Shloka 27 is the practice of meditation, where we sacrifice the senses, meaning we withdraw our mind, our attention, our very awareness from the senses. We withdraw them from the external senses towards an inner journey, and the functions of the vital airs, the prana, that becomes suspended or that becomes slow into the very fires of yoga in the shape of self-control. It takes a tremendous amount of self-discipline to reach that level of balance. And that happens only when there is sufficient wisdom accompanying such practice, right? So therefore he says it is this state of meditation where the absorption automatically suspends the functioning of the senses, automatically suspends the vital airs of breathing and movement, however temporarily or however permanently, depends on the practitioner of the meditation. In Shloka 28, some perform sacrifice with material possessions, some offer sacrifice in the shape of austerities, others sacrifice through the practice of yoga, while some striving souls, observing austere oaths, perform sacrifice in the shape of wisdom through the study of sacred texts. And so here Krishna once again talks about the varying forms of purificating rituals that we undergo by renouncing material possessions, right? Or undergoing severe austerities and penances. Or walking the path of yoga, Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga of Yama, Niyama, Pranayama, Asana, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. And there are other souls who observe austere vows, right? We have just discussed at some of those vows, like, going up to the Himalayas and living in a cold climate with nothing to protect them from those freezing temperatures, or some who stand in the midst of Panchagni, the 5 fires, and expose their bodies for such heat, tremendous amount of heat. So they observe austere vows. And there are others who perform this sacrifice through the study of sacred texts, the Jnana Yogis. So, Shloka 29 and 30. Other yogis offer the act of exhalation into that of inhalation even. So others, the act of inhalation into that of exhalation. There are still others given to the practice of pranayama, breath control, who, having regulated their diet and controlled the processes of exhalation and inhalation, both pour their vital airs into the vital airs themselves. All these have their sins consumed away by sacrifice and understand the meaning of sacrificial worship. So here Krishna says that through the practice of pranayama, there are very ancient techniques of pranayama which we will see in a few other shlokas, which are not prevalent anymore, and or maybe they are, but they are not easily accessible to common society. The ancient techniques of pranayama combined with asanas, body postures, leads to the purification and blossoming of the chakras. So thereby Krishna here talks about how such techniques have also been used to purify themselves, to have their samskaras cleansed away. Shloka 31. Arjuna, yogis who enjoy the nectar that has been left over after the performance of a sacrifice attain the eternal Brahma. To the man who does not offer sacrifice, even this world is not happy. How then can the other world be happy? Here Krishna is referring to the offering to the Yajñashala. So after the performance of a fire, of a Vedic fire ritual, the prasad that is consumed, which is Yajñashishta Amrita it is called, is considered to be divine nectar. It is considered to be blessed by the gods themselves. So Krishna here refers to those yogis who, after the performance of a Vedic fire ritual, consume those leftovers. They attain the eternal Brahma. they have the possibility of God realization. But for a man who does not perform any sacrifices, neglects his duties as a father, as a son, as a husband, as a member of society, he neglects these duties, he will be deprived of liberation from bondage, and there will be no peace for him in the human dimension. So how can he be happy and peaceful in any other dimension? Krishna asks. So in Shloka 32, many such forms of sacrifice have been set forth in detail through the mouth of the Vedas. Know them all as involving the action of mind, senses, and body. Thus, knowing the truth about them, you shall be freed from the bondage of action through their performance. So here Krishna says that the Vedic rituals that have been given to us, handed down to us from the divine superconscious, they all involve the mind, the body, and the senses, and they are purificatory rituals for all of these three. If you know the truth about them and you perform them accordingly with having that underlying knowledge, then you shall be freed from the bondage of actions. Often we perform rituals in modern times completely disconnected with the act itself. One, we personally do not perform any ritual. A priest performs it on our behalf. Two, we are colossally ignorant of what actually takes place. And three, we complain incessantly on having to perform such rituals. That is the state of society today. Shloka 33. Arjuna, sacrifice through knowledge is superior to sacrifice performed with material things. For all actions without exception culminate in knowledge, O son of Kunti. And so here, finally, Krishna comes to the point. JnanaKarmaSamnyasaYoga. If you recall the title of the 4th chapter. And so he says, the sacrifice through knowledge is superior to sacrifice performed with material things. For all actions without exception culminate in knowledge, O son of Kunti. So it is not sufficient for us just to perform actions. Anything can be trained, any creature can be trained to perform. We have performing monkeys, performing bears, performing dogs. And what separates us from them is our knowledge. And thereby, all knowledge has to be accompanied, all actions has to be accompanied by the knowledge as to why we are performing these actions, and how much more closer are they going to bring us towards the divine, and how much further are they taking us away from the divine. Shloka 34. Understand the true nature of that knowledge by approaching illumined soul. If you prostrate at their feet, render them service, and question them with an open and guileless heart, those wise seers of truth will instruct you in that knowledge. And here Krishna says, the etiquette that is required for a student of spiritual wisdom to approach a guru. So if you have a necessity to understand spiritual concepts, if you require sufficient knowledge on what is the right path that we need to choose to walk upon, if you even need to understand what is knowledge, as Krishna defines it in chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, the only true knowledge is the knowledge of the causal body, which is the knowledge of the divine that is present within us. And so Krishna says, approach an illumined soul, a soul that has already studied, made efforts, disciplined themselves to gain sufficient knowledge. Approach them and follow an etiquette, prostrate at their feet, meaning humbly, with great humility, render them service, and question them with an open and guileless heart. The questions must not be tainted by ego. It must be with the hunger of a seeker's heart. And then, and only then, those wise seers of truth will instruct us in that knowledge. This must be etiquette, and I cannot stress enough about this on the path of spirituality, how important a role this plays. Dronacharya was famed as a teacher of military science and warfare to the Pancha Pandavas, the 5 Pandavas and the 100 Kauravas. And one day, while he was traveling through a forest, he came across a young man who showed excellent skill at archery. He demonstrated such skill that Dronacharya was taken aback and thought for a second that this young man would far outskill Arjuna, who was then known to be a famed archer. And so he made inquiries as to who this young man's guru was. And the young man said, "But you are my guru." Dronacharya was taken aback and said, "Really? What are you talking about?" And so the young man takes Dronacharya through the forest to a little hermitage, and there he points at a clay idol that he made of Dronacharya and said, "I have taken you as my guru and learnt this art." And Dronacharya then is shocked. Now, there are numerous commentators, and most of them will tell you that Dronacharya was shocked because he refused to accept that there would be somebody else far more skillful than his favorite student Arjuna, and so therefore he demanded Guru Dakshina. And that young man unhesitatingly offered the thumb of his right hand as Guru Dakshina. And that young man was called Ekalavya. But that is not the reason. The reason far outweighs mere favoritism between students. Dronacharya is a guru. He is an acharya of a lineage that goes back into time. Any student that comes up to his standards of excellence will be acknowledged and awarded. But what Dronacharya objected to was the manner in which such knowledge was sought. The etiquette that was sorely lacking in Ekalavya. It was that lack of etiquette that prompted Dronacharya to demand the Guru Dakshina. Shloka 37, Shloka 35. Arjuna, when you have reached enlightenment, ignorance will delude you no more. In the light of that knowledge, you will see the entire creation first within your own self, and then in me, the Oversoul. And Krishna here tempts us. It's such a temptation to reach enlightenment where we are no longer succumbed to the bonds of ignorance, to the illusions of Maya. And in that light of knowledge, we will witness the entire creation first within ourselves and then in the divine. Shloka 36. Even though you were the foulest of all sinners, this knowledge alone would carry you like a raft across all your sin. And so here Krishna says that even though we could be the foulest of sinners, but if we have this knowledge of the divine, if we have the knowledge of the divine presence within us, and that knowledge alone would carry us across all our samskaras. Why? Because it is the knowledge of action in inaction, and knowledge of inaction in action. Shloka 37. For as the blazing fire turns the fuel to ashes, Arjuna, even so the fire of knowledge turns all actions to ashes. And so here Krishna says that just like fire reduces everything to ashes, to dust, the fire of knowledge reduces all samskaras into dust, meaning the illusions of Maya will be reduced to dust, and for the first time, with the light of knowledge, we will be able to see clearly. There will be great clarity in our vision as to the purpose of our life, as to the reason behind why we have come into a human dimension. And thereby all our actions will be neutralized. No more will we be able to attract any samskaras. Shloka 38. On earth there is no purifier as great as knowledge. He who has attained purity of heart through a prolonged practice of karma yoga automatically sees the light of truth in the self in the course of time. There is no great purifier as knowledge. If we have knowledge, eventually, sooner or later, we will be able to perceive the truth. With knowledge, with the reasons and our understanding as to why we have to act and why we have to act in a certain manner, and when we invest every action of ours necessarily with that knowledge of the divine, we will attain purity of heart. Eventually, all our complexities and impurities, all our samskaras will dissolve, will reduce to ashes, and a prolonged practice of karma yoga will lead us to the light of truth. A prolonged practice of karma yoga. This is a very important phrase that he has used. Why? Because it is still bound to action. So as long as we are subjecting ourselves to actions, then the process of purification takes place. So in this lifetime, possibly our prarabdha karma will be cleansed. That little overnight bag of samskaras that we have brought with us. But what about our sanchita karma? The accumulated karma of lifetimes. Right? So a prolonged practice of karma yoga. Eventually, the light of truth will dawn on one's mind by the grace of the divine. There are other ways. Karma yoga is one path. There are other paths too, as we shall see in the other chapters of the Gita. Shloka 39. He who has mastered his senses is exclusively devoted to his practice and is full of faith, attains knowledge, having had the revelation to truth. He immediately attains supreme peace in the form of God realization. And how are we going to attain this knowledge is the question, right? So here Krishna says that master the senses. Devote your time exclusively to this practice. The practice of karma yoga. To do your duty without any attachment to the action or to the results of the action. To be wary of attractions and repulsions and treat both of them with equal disinterest. Have faith, then attain knowledge. Take these steps in order to attain the knowledge that is required as to why we are doing what we are doing. Then, having had the revelation of the truth, then there is a chance of God realization. Then there is the chance of liberation. Shloka 40. He who lacks discrimination is devoid of faith and is at the same time possessed by doubt, is lost to the spiritual path. For the doubting soul there is neither this world nor the world beyond, nor even happiness. So an indiscriminate approach, an approach that is devoid of faith, a questioning nature, leads us nowhere. So firm your will, make a firm, powerful sankalpa and have faith that there is a purpose to this human existence, and that the path you have chosen to walk upon will eventually lead you to that divine. Because the contrary is bereft of any grace or happiness. Shloka 41. Arjuna, actions do not bind him who has dedicated all his actions to God according to the spirit of Karma Yoga, whose doubts have been torn to shreds by wisdom, and who is self-possessed. And so finally he's reiterating once again the kernel of the wisdom of chapter 4 by saying that actions will not generate samskaras if these actions are dedicated to the divine. And having knowledge as to why we are performing these actions, we will have no doubts. And having self-discipline, we will attain merger with the divine. And so we come to the last shloka of this chapter, shloka 42. Therefore, Arjuna, slashing to pieces with the sword of wisdom this doubt in your heart born of ignorance, establish yourself in Karma Yoga in the shape of even-temperedness and stand up for the fight. And so here Krishna uses the analogy of a sword, of a warrior, and says, pick it up and slash away at the doubt that is there in your heart. Use the sword of wisdom, not the sword of steel. Because this doubt, these questions are born out of ignorance. They are not the questions of a wise and learned man. So once you remove this doubt, then wisdom will dawn, and then you can establish yourself in Karma Yoga as a Karma Yogi, and in the shape of even-temperedness, Sthita Prajna, in the shape of a balanced equanimity as to whether you will win or lose this war. Stand up for the fight. Again, at one level, Krishna is no doubt addressing Arjuna and encouraging him to physically fight the war. But at another level, for the rest of us who are studying Gita, we are still caught up in the battlefields of our own lives. And so here Krishna says, fight against your tendencies that is pulling you away from the divine. Fight against the very bonds of nature that is taking you away from the divine. Om Tatsadita Shrimad Bhagavad Gitasu Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayan Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade JnanaKarmaSamnyasaYoga Nama Chaturthodhyayaha. Thus, in the Upanishad sung by the Lord, the science of Brahma, the scripture of Yoga, the dialogue between Shri Krishna and Arjuna, ends the 4th chapter titled The Yoga of Knowledge, as well as the disciplines of action and knowledge. Om Yogesham Satchidanandam Vasudevam प्रियं धर्मसंस्थापकं वीरं कृष्णो वन्दे जगद्गुरुं श्रीकृष्णो वन्दे जगद्गुरुम् ॐ श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।